Hello and welcome to Two Man Meta. I'm Mondo Spanner.
And I'm Auntie Kaz, and on today's episode of OOP, we are looking at the keywords for Warhammer Age of Sigmar Champions, the card game.
Nice.
So we'll start off with a nice and easy one that you'll be familiar with from last video. So this is clunky. So where it's highlighted in black, it's a keyword on these cards. And clunky refers to the shape of the rotations on it. So anything that says clunky refers to these ones rather than the circular, smooth ones.
Yeah. And it basically just means that you have to do something before before it's allowed to then rotate on effectively. So it's on a lot of the champions, it's on some of the blessings, and it's on some of the unit cards as well, and some of the spells as well, to be fair. Okay, cool. So that's clunky sorted. What we got next?
So next we have deploy. So if a card says deploy, it is simply referring to putting a unit or spell onto the battlefield, and it will have a location indicated by the Tetris blocks, as I like to call them, or by it'll actually state where to put it.
And in this case, for example, there's a little dot if you look in the middle of the blocks, and that would be the person who had deployed this spell. So this would be the wizard that had deployed this spell, would be where that little dot is, which hopefully you can see on the screen.
So the person that plays the ability has to be in the center, but it can affect the center or the two by the side of it. So deploy is simply putting out a unit. In this case, it says risen or spirit unit from your hand or discard pile onto the highlighted champion. So deploy is simply the act of putting them out.
Yeah, and it's one of the main actions that you have all the way through the game, because you're always deploying units and you're always deploying spells the majority of the time.
So next up we have discard. This couldn't be any simpler as a mechanic. It's simply discarding things.
Yeah, so if you read this, it says that this does 2 damage to your opponent, and then if your opponent has more than 7 cards in their hand, they must discard cards from their hand until they have 7 left. So 7 cards left.
Discard means simply put it in the discard pile from wherever it tells you to discard. So next we have disengaged, and we'll also talk about engaged with this one as well, because it's 2 eggs, 2 birds with 1 stone. So disengaged, it will show you where you are engaged and disengaged. So if you have something in front of you as an enemy unit or spell, you are engaged.
Yeah, and this says, while the highlighted champion, which is the square with a dot in it, is disengaged, in other words, there's no one in the red square, there's no enemy unit in the red square, increase the damage from this champion's abilities by 1.
So next we have a really strong mechanic called dormant. So this keyword means that no cards in the highlighted area can rotate.
So basically what that does is it stops, it basically pauses units, and also if they can't rotate, it means that they won't do damage at the beginning of your turn. So yeah, that's a horrifically strong blessing there for death.
Or prevent damage or anything that triggers off of their rotation.
Yeah, that's pretty dope.
So next, another super simple one, we have draw. So that simply means draw cards from your deck.
Yeah, so like you can see here on it, it says gain 4 health, that's nice, and then it says draw 2 cards, also very nice. And that's another blessing, so that's another one-off thing, isn't it, after your champions have rotated.
So next we have exhaust. This card's got multiple ones on because we couldn't find a single card that says simply exhaust on. So when you exhaust a blessing, spell or unit, is rotated to its last corner and then turned face down. So
basically, to me, that would just mean that that's just going to end. So it skips all of the rotations before that card would have done, and instead it just basically goes to your discard pile.
No, it doesn't go to your discard pile. It simply sits there. Exhaust is not the same as removed, so it rotates to its last corner, doesn't trigger any effect, and sits there.
That's really interesting. So that means it could jam up that lane. Ugh, disgusting. Moving on.
So the next one we have is expire, and expire simply means flipping the card to use it. So in this case, it's a blessing that's 1 use. So when it's used, it expires, you flip it over, and it doesn't get used again.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it says passive still. But this one says, ignore any damage from a highlighted enemy or ally that would defeat you. Instead, gain 4 health and expire this blessing. Oh, right, so that just sits there until you need to use it.
Until
So
it
it's
gets triggered
passive
itself.
until it expires.
An interesting one with this is expire is not mentioned in the rules or on any of the rule cards that I could find. So I had to actually look this up specifically, and it is difficult to do with these cards.
Yeah.
So next we have one that is also not listed in the rules in the keyword section, but it is further on in the rules. Heroic action. So heroic action is simply using one of your actions instead of playing a card or drawing a card to do whatever the heroic action says. In this case, deal 1 damage to your opponent.
I mean, seems all right. It's a bit wet, but we'll let it off.
So the next one we have is Last Stand. Now, Last Stand is a really interesting mechanic that I really like.
I really like it. It's a useful mechanic.
So the effects of a Last Stand are triggered when it is about to be removed. So when it has finished rotating and is about to disappear off the table, you can trigger a Last Stand. But also, when it dies to removal, you can trigger Last Stand.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so strong. So say if someone does get rid of this card or tries to make you discard this card and it ends up in your pile, this one, for example, its Last Stand abilities, it does 2 damage to your opponent. So no matter what happens, this guy's going to be doing damage, whether your opponent gets rid of it or not, which is really, really useful.
So then we have a variation of keywords. So played, plays, and play are all pretty obvious. You know, you can only play things, or you can play things, or you play things. It's very, very self-explanatory in that term. Like, I don't know why this is even a keyword.
Well, so this one, for example, I think it's so that it makes it more specific. So, for example, this says this can only be played by a demon champion. So, therefore, you could have another chaos champion who isn't necessarily a demon. So, for example, our Blood Reaver chieftain is not a demon. So, he would not be able to do this ability. Only a demon warrior would be able to play this ability. So I think it's just really just trying to be more specific.
Just to grab your attention to it, to make sure that you are reading the full card.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not too bad. It does seem really obvious, but it's a nice little reminder text essentially.
Yeah.
So next up we have Rend. Rend is awesome. So Rend bypasses any damage reduction.
Yeah.
So if they've got some sort of shield spell up that reduces damage, or a unit that reduces damage, it completely ignores that and just deals full damage.
So this one's quite an interesting one. It says when you rotate, you do the damage that's written in the circles onto your opponent. However, if the highlighted champion, so if you look here on the Tetris block or whatever, we've got our champion, which is the square with the dot in it, and then the opposing champion would be the person who's opposite where this is in the same lane. If their champion costs 7 or more, the damage is done with Rend, which means that, yeah, they can't block it, they can't use spells to block it, or anything else. So that's really, really useful.
So then we have Restart. Now this is a really cool one. So with these abilities, you can restart a card, which means you turn it back to its original top corner, but you don't trigger any of the effects of any of the rotations, because it's not rotating, it's just going straight back to 0, its original positioning. And then you can start a card again. You can slow an opponent's down until you can get the removal to deal with it.
In the initial wave, in the first wave, in the starter sets, Order seem to have quite a few things that can restart. It's almost unique to Order. I don't think I've seen it in any of the other factions. So yeah, that's really it's really useful.
So then we have Rotate. So rotate simply means that you turn the card one way or the other. So it will say you can either rotate it or you can rotate it backwards. And these do trigger as soon as the corners that you rotate to hit. So if you turn your opponent's card, whatever happens, happens. If you turn your own card, it triggers anything that happens off that. So it's a good way to advance things on if you're trying to get something done. There's probably uses for it if your opponent's got like a big deal damage to themselves after they've dealt damage to you, it could be handy. It gives you a lot of control of the board as well to slow things down so that they can't empty lanes out to cast new spells and units, which is really nice.
The reason why this one would be good was, say, for example, if you look, what happens is it rotates one corner on for all of your, basically all of the units that you control. So what would be quite a useful play there, if you could do it, because you'd have to have a lot of cards in hand, is you could deploy 4 units and do all of their initial damage. Then you could play this card, and that would then spin them all on by one corner, and they'd do all of those corners damage again. And that would be insanely powerful. Like, you know, you could get some real juicy damage out of that. So yeah, this can be a really powerful keyword and tactic. Right.
So then we have remove. So remove is simply about taking things off the board. It does trigger last stand effects.
Nice.
So if you remove them, it triggers in the order you remove them as well. So it builds like a stack from Magic the Gathering. But it's just simply removal. Like if it says remove it, you put it into the discard from wherever it is on the board.
Yeah, so this one, for example, is an ability, and it says remove a highlighted spell or unit. So in other words, the one that is across from the champion that is playing this card, and then it also does 1 damage to your opponent.
So the final mechanic we have to talk about is 2 at the same time. So we have stacking units and support keywords. So stacking units can be used to stack on each other. So if you get a normal unit, like so, you can stack a unit on top of it, which stops the rotation of the original card. So that stays in whatever position you've rotated it to at the point that you add the stacking card.
So say, for example, I have my skeleton icon bearer out. I managed to use it to get a removed or exhausted unit back into my hand, and which would have made it turn once. And then I play my Crypt Shield skeletons, and they sit on top of it and they stack on top of it. And then in future turns, they rotate on top of it. However, their ability, if you look, says that they reduce damage received from highlighted enemies, which is really interesting because not only is it the one that's directly opposite them, but it's also the one that's on either side of it. It reduces damage received from highlighted enemies by the rotate at the top. And also this is increased by 1 per support. Now your supports are your cards that are underneath.
So you can have up to 2 cards underneath a stacking card, but the second one has to be a stacking card as well. You can't put a normal card on top of one that doesn't have stacking.
Yes. So yeah, so you could have normal, stack, and then what happens is that this one rotates on the top, and then once this one's rotated out, they all go, don't they?
Yes.
Right, okay, lovely. So that's stacking. A brief overview thereof. Basically, if you are playing a destruction deck, they have a lot of stacking units that have some very, very useful damage dealing abilities for their support. In death, it's more of a reduced damage ability when they're stacked. But in general, the support adds +1 to either the damage or the damage reduction that unit is going to do. Have we got anything else, Auntie Kaz?
No, that is all the keywords that you'll need to know for the first wave of Warhammer Age of Sigmar Champions, the card game.
You knew all the words in the right order and everything.
I know, I've been practicing. So that is it for this episode. Next episode, we will be doing a tutorial of showing you how to play the game. And then after that, we're going to crack a booster box.
Yeah, man. Boosters and games. That's where it's at. Right. See you all soon.
If you enjoyed this episode of 2-Man Meta, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date as we release multiple episodes each week. If you would like to help support the channel, check out the links in the description below, as well as links to our social media pages. Thank you for watching. See you next episode.